My son showed up at my door with his wife, his kids, and a packed SUV without asking. By morning, they expected breakfast, babysitting, clean dishes, and a free place to live. When I said no, they called me selfish. So I left for the coast, opened my banking app, and by sunset, his gas card was declined. My home in a quiet, leafy suburb of Charleston usually smells like freshly ground coffee and old books. At 68, I've grown to cherish the stillness. But this past Tuesday evening, the screech of tires outside shattered my peace. My son, Julian, and his wife Brooke were standing on my porch, their SUV packed to the roof with cardboard boxes. "Mom, it's just for a few weeks until the new place is ready," Julian said, already shoving the first heavy box into my foyer. Brooke didn't even look at me. She was frantically tapping on her phone, barking orders at Julian about where to stack the luggage. I stood in the doorway, hands buried deep in the pockets of my cardigan. I didn't ask why. I just watched as they occupied my guest room in a matter of seconds. Brooke tossed her designer trench coat onto my antique mahogany desk and immediately demanded the Wi-Fi password. "We're starving! Did you go grocery shopping?" she shouted from the hallway. In that moment, I didn't feel hurt, just a crystal clear realization my sanctuary had just become a staging ground. I gave a brief nod and walked into the kitchen. I didn't cook for them. I poured myself a glass of water and watched as they spread their mess like a wildfire. They clearly thought I was the sweet, doting grandma who'd be thrilled to be needed again. But I saw the dynamic instantly. Julian avoided my eyes. He looked like a passenger in his own life. Brooke, on the other hand, was already sizing up my living room as if she were planning to rearrange the furniture. They spoke about me as if I were a piece of decor that could be moved at will. "We can sleep in tomorrow. Your mom is here for the kids," Brooke whispered loud enough for me to hear. A faint smile touched my lips. They had no idea that my kindness wasn't an open-ended credit line. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and went to sleep. The first domino had been tipped. At 7 sharp, I was at the kitchen table as usual. When Brooke finally emerged 2 hours later in her silk pajamas, she looked at me expectantly. The table was set, but only for one. "Where's breakfast for the kids? And we need someone to pick them up from daycare this afternoon. We're headed downtown to shop," she said, her tone more like a boss than a guest. I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey. "The grocery store is a 10-minute walk, Brooke. And my calendar for today is full," I replied calmly. Her face turned a blotchy red. She was used to people dancing to her tune. Julian shuffled in, trying to play peacemaker. "Come on, Mom. It's just for today. We need to unwind." The move was a nightmare. I looked him in the eye. My son was a good man, but he had forgotten how to say the word no. "Relaxation is a luxury you have to organize for yourself, Julian," I said, loading my plate into the dishwasher. I caught Brooke rolling her eyes, muttering something about a stubborn old woman. Instead of arguing, I reached for my notebook. While they debated in the kitchen about how to navigate a day without my help, I went around the house, noting the meter readings for the water and electricity. I owned this house. I paid the bills. I went down to the basement and turned the guest room heater to its lowest setting. It wasn't cold enough to freeze, but it was just chilly enough to keep them from getting too comfortable. When I came back up, Brooke announced they were leaving and that I could at least do the dishes. I didn't answer. I just watched them pull out of the driveway. As soon as the door clicked shut, I pulled my travel bag out of the closet. If they thought I was going to stay here and play the help, they had another thing coming. When they returned that evening, they found me in the living room reading. Brooke was loaded down with bags from high-end boutiques. "We brought pizza. You can grab the plates," she called out from the hall. I didn't move. The plates are in the cabinet, Brooke. You know where the kitchen is. A heavy silence fell over the room. Julian cleared his throat nervously. Mom, what's up? You're being so cold. I put my book down. I'm not being cold, Julian. I'm retired. You are guests in my home, not the new owners. Brooke let out a sharp, artificial laugh. Guests don't usually pay for anything, so you should be happy we're here to liven the place up. She knew exactly what she was doing, rubbing it in that I was letting them stay for free. What she didn't know was that I had already begun rearranging my own life. The next morning, I installed a lock on my chest freezer in the basement, where I kept my expensive steaks and organic groceries. In the upstairs fridge, I left only the bare essentials. When Brooke realized the expensive brie and the vintage wine were gone that afternoon, she snapped. Are you seriously hiding food now? That's pathological. I looked her dead in the eye. It's my property. If you have specific cravings, go buy them. She tried to stare me down, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't some lonely widow begging for attention. I was a woman defending her space. Julian just stood there staring at his shoes. He was the bridge Brooke was trying to walk across to trample me. But I wasn't a foundation of stone anymore. I was shifting sand flowing out from under her feet. Tomorrow. You're driving the kids yourselves, I added. The rage in Brooke's eyes was almost vibrating. She had no clue this was just the beginning. That night, I stayed awake late. I could hear them whispering in the guest room. Brooke was venting about my eccentricities while Julian tried to calm her down. They were already planning how to remodel my living room once I finally came to my senses. I smiled in the dark. The next morning, I didn't wait for the drama. I left the house at 6 a.m. before the kids were even awake. I drove 3 hours to my friend Martha's beach cottage on the coast. We had discussed this days ago, while Julian and Brooke were likely standing in my kitchen, wondering why the coffee wasn't made. And who was going to watch the kids? I was sitting on a deck chair, breathing in the salt air. I didn't turn my phone off, but I put it on silent. When I checked the screen 3 hours later, I had 5 missed calls from Julian and a barrage of texts from Brooke. Where are you? The kids are crying. This is irresponsible. I typed a short reply. I'm on vacation. I didn't leave the key to the pantry out. Good luck with the daily routine. I knew they had no idea how to run my high-efficiency washer without ruining the settings, or where the main water shutoff was if a pipe leaked. I wasn't withdrawing my love. I was withdrawing my labor. Without the engine that I provided, their luxury lifestyle was about to stall. Julian called again. This time I picked up. Mom, Brooke is losing it. She has a hair appointment and I have to work, I answered calmly. Then you'll have to prioritize, son. I am no longer your backup plan. I hung up before he could respond. 2 days passed. I enjoyed the solitude of the ocean while my inbox overflowed. Brooke tried a new tactic, guilt. The kids miss their grandma so much. Please come home, we can talk about everything. I knew what that meant. They needed someone to clean and someone to foot the bill. During my time away, I made another decision. I logged into my bank account. For years, I had been paying for Julian's cell phone plan and his car insurance, a leftover from his college days that I'd never stopped because I wanted to help. I canceled the auto pay immediately. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $300 a month, but it was the fun money they used for their daily lattes and subscriptions. That afternoon, the inevitable explosion happened. Julian called, sounding frantic. Mom, my card was declined at the gas station and my phone service is cut off. What is going on? I sat in a seaside cafe watching the seagulls. I've restructured my budget, Julian. Since you're living at my place rent-free, I assume you're saving plenty of money to cover your own bills. He stammered about being blindsided. You blindsided me when you showed up on my porch with a U-Haul, I countered. Brooke grabbed the phone. Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. She was practically screaming. You're ruining us. We have commitments. How are we supposed to get through the month? I remained completely zen. Maybe with fewer shopping sprees, I'm not your bank anymore. You're adults. I ended the call and ordered a second piece of key lime pie. The feeling of lightness was intoxicating. I wasn't being cruel. I was being consistent. In the distance, I saw the tide going out, just like I had pulled back from their dependency. After a week, I drove back home. I expected chaos, but what I found was a mix of defiance and desperation. The house smelled like burnt food and stale laundry. Brooke sat in the living room with a scowl that could curdle milk, while Julian was feebly trying to fix a toy car. Oh, nice of the lady of the manor to grace us with her presence. Brooke spat. I ignored her. I went straight to my room and dropped my bags. Then I went to the kitchen. They had used my good copper pans and hadn't cleaned them. Without saying a word, I gathered the pans, put them in a plastic bin, and locked them in my private hall closet. What is that supposed to be? Julian asked, standing in the doorway. This is my property. Those who don't care for it don't get to use it, I said. Brooke marched over, hands on her hips. We can't live like this. This is psychological warfare. I looked her in the eye, firm and unyielding. No, Brooke. This is reality. You are living in my house under my rules. If you don't like the rules, you are free to leave tomorrow. She laughed hysterically. We don't have another place yet. You know that I shrugged. Then I suggest you start acting like guests and stop acting like an occupying force. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I could hear them screaming at each other in the hall. Julian was blaming her for making things worse, and she was calling him a spineless coward. The cracks in their alliance were starting to show. They thought they could isolate me, but instead, they were isolating themselves from each other. I climbed into a hot bath and turned on some jazz. I was back in my house, but this time, the power lines were clearly drawn. They were waiting for a sign of weakness. They'd be waiting a long time. The next morning, I noticed scratches on the wood of my pantry door. Brooke had tried to pick the lock. I called them both into the living room. Someone tried to damage my property, I said, matter-of-factly. If that happens again, your stay here ends immediately. Brooke looked triumphant. And what are you going to do? Throw your own grandkids out on the street. You'd never do that. That was her ace in the hole, or so she thought. But I had an answer she didn't expect. The grandkids are welcome to stay with me as long as they need. But you two are adults. You are responsible for your own roof. I pulled an envelope from my pocket. It wasn't a legal notice, but a list of local extended stay hotels and cheap short-term rentals. Here are your options. I'm giving you exactly 3 days to make a choice. Julian looked pale. Mom, you can't be serious. I looked at him, and for the first time since they arrived, there was genuine pity in my eyes. Julian, I love you, but I love myself enough not to let you throw away my dignity. I spent the rest of the day loading my most valuable heirlooms and documents into my car and taking them to a climate-controlled storage unit. I was making my house empty to them. If they thought they could pressure me by breaking things or holding my belongings hostage, they'd find nothing but bare walls. When I got back that evening, the atmosphere was icy. Brooke was on the phone frantically, likely looking for a new victim to borrow money from. I made a simple soup and ate it in the silence of my room. I felt the pressure rising, but I was ready for the finale. Anyone who plays power games has to be prepared to lose everything, and they had already lost their character. The third day arrived. Brooke clearly hadn't slept. She had dark circles under her eyes and a manic energy. She tried one last aggressive offensive. While I was watering my hydrangeas, she stormed out. "We aren't leaving. You can't just kick us out. We've established residency here," I set the hose aside. "Mail delivery doesn't give you the right to decide who sleeps in my living room, Brooke. I had the locks for the upstairs and the garage changed this morning while you were out." She stared at me dumbfounded. "You did what?" I jingled the new keys on my belt. "You have access to the guest room and the hallway. The living room, the kitchen, and my personal quarters are off limits starting now unless I am present." Julian walked out looking utterly defeated. "Mom, we can't even cook." I nodded. "Correct? Since you refuse to chip in for utilities and damage my supplies, you'll have to find other arrangements for food." In that moment, Brooke broke down, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. She screamed insults, calling me a cold-hearted witch and threatening to never let me see the kids again. I listened calmly. When she finally ran out of breath, I said, "Your anger only proves my decision was right. Anyone who thinks that way about the person providing them a roof doesn't deserve that roof." Julian took her by the arm and pulled her away. He was ashamed. I could see it in his eyes. For the first time, he was seeing his wife exactly as I saw her. A manipulator who had finally lost control. They retreated into the small guest room like they were trapped. Without money, without access to my resources, and with a husband who was finally waking up, the countdown was over. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. No screaming, no slamming doors. When I stepped into the hall, I saw the first few boxes sitting by the front door. Julian was loading the SUV. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in a week, but he looked determined. Brooke was already sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. She had lost, and she knew it. I walked out to Julian. He paused and looked at me. "We found a small apartment, Mom. It's old and it's on the other side of town, but it's ours." I put a hand on his shoulder. "That's good, Julian. It's the first step toward being a man who provides for his family instead of letting them be a burden on others." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry for all of it." I handed him an envelope. He hesitated, likely thinking it was more money. "Those are the old family photos," I said, softly. "So you can remember who we were before all this happened." He took it and squeezed my hand briefly. Brooke honked the horn impatiently. Without another word, he got in and drove away. I stood in the driveway for a long time watching the car until it disappeared around the corner. Then I turned around and went back inside. The house was dirty, it smelled like strangers, and it was a mess. But it was silent. I opened every window to let the stale air of the last few weeks escape. I didn't start cleaning right away. I sat in my armchair and closed my eyes. The weight that had been crushing my shoulders, the weight of false responsibility and constant criticism, was gone. I was the master of my time and my space again. I hadn't burned bridges. I had just reinforced the railing so no one could push me off. 3 months have passed. My house is sparkling again. I repainted the guest room a bright, cheery yellow. It's my craft room now. Julian calls once a week. We don't talk about Brooke, and we don't talk about money. He tells me about the kids and his new job. He sounds stressed, but he sounds proud. He's paying his own bills now. Brooke doesn't send messages anymore. She realized her currency of threats and manipulation has no value with me. Sometimes I see photos of her on social media. She's still trying to project the image of a perfect life, but I can see the cracks. I sit in my garden and enjoy the autumn air. The neighbors occasionally ask where my son went, and I just tell them he grew up. It's the truth. He had to fall to learn how to stand. And I had to be tough to keep from losing my own soul. Yesterday, a package arrived. It was a drawing from my grandkids, lots of glitter and lopsided houses. For Grandma, it said. I taped it to the fridge. It's the only thing hanging there. I don't need a calendar for other people's lives anymore. I don't need to justify my happiness. My life is no longer that of a shock absorber. I am the rock in the garden that is just there. Steady, calm, and unmovable for those who try to push me aside. When the sun goes down, I turn off the lights. Not just to save electricity, but because I'm no longer afraid of the dark. I am free, and this time I didn't pay for it with my pride, but with my resolve. The door is shut, and the key is safe in my hand. It's a good evening. Some people don't move in because they need a roof over their heads. They move in because they think your kindness has no locks, no boundaries, and no price. It's only when the door clicks shut behind them that they finally realize who the house actually belongs to.